Chapter 9. The Dancing Academy. Of all the dancing academies that ever were established, there never was one more popular in its immediate vicinity than Signor Billsmethi's of the King's Theatre. It was not in Spring Gardens, or Newman Street, or Berners Street, or Gower Street, or Charlotte Street, or Percy Street, or any of the other numerous streets which have been devoted time out of mind to professional people, dispensaries, and boarding houses. It was not in the West End at all. It rather approximated to the eastern portion of London, being situated in the populous and improving neighbourhood of Gray's Inn Lane. It was not a dear dancing academy. 4 and 6 a quarter is decidedly cheap upon the whole. It was very select, the number of pupils being strictly limited to 75, and a quarter's payment in advance being rigidly exacted. There was a public tuition and private tuition, an assembly room and a parlour. Signor Billsmethi's family were always thrown in with the parlour, and included in parlour price. That is to say, a private pupil had Signor Billsmethi's parlour to dance in, and Signor Billsmethi's family to dance with. And when he had been sufficiently broken in the parlour, he began to run in couples in the assembly room. Such was the dancing academy of Signor Billsmethi, when Mr. Augustus Cooper, of Fetter Lane, first saw an unstamped advertisement walking leisurely down Holborn Hill, announcing to the world that Signor Billsmethi of the King's Theatre intended opening for the season with a grand ball. Now, Mr. Augustus Cooper was in the oil and colour line, just of age, with a little money, a little business, and a little mother, who, having managed her husband and his business in his lifetime, took to managing her son and his business after his decease. And so, somehow or other, he had been cooped up in the little back parlour behind the shop on weekdays, and in a little deal box without a lid, called by courtesy a pew, at Bethel Chapel on Sundays, and had seen no more of the world than if he had been an infant all his days. Whereas young White, at the gasfitter's over the way, 3 years younger than him, had been flaring away like a winkin', going to the theatre, supping at harmonic meetings, eating oysters by the barrel, drinking stout by the gallon, even out all night, and coming home as cool in the morning as if nothing had happened. So Mr. Augustus Cooper made up his mind that he would not stand it any longer, and had that very morning expressed to his mother a firm determination to be blowed in the event of his not being instantly provided with a street door key. And he was walking down Holborn Hill, thinking about all these things, and wondering how he could manage to get introduced into genteel society for the first time, when his eyes rested on Signor Billsmethi's announcement, which, it immediately struck him, was just the very thing he wanted. For he should not only be able to select a genteel circle of acquaintance at once, out of the 5 and 70 pupils at 4 and 6 a quarter, but should qualify himself at the same time to go through a hornpipe in private society with perfect ease to himself and great delight to his friends. So he stopped the unstamped advertisement, an animated sandwich composed of a boy between 2 boards, and having procured a very small card with the signor's address indented thereon, walked straight at once to the signor's house, and very fast he walked too, for fear the list should be filled up and the 5 and 70 completed before he got there. The signor was at home, and, what was still more gratifying, he was an Englishman. Such a nice man, and so polite. The list was not full, but it was a most extraordinary circumstance that there was only just one vacancy, and even that one would have been filled up that very morning, only Signor Billsmethi was dissatisfied with the reference, and, being very much afraid that the lady wasn't select, wouldn't take her. "And very much delighted I am, Mr. Cooper," said Signor Billsmethi, "that I did not take her. I assure you, Mr. Cooper, I don't say it to flatter you, for I know you're above it, that I consider myself extremely fortunate in having a gentleman of your manners and appearance, sir." "I'm very glad of it too, sir," said Augustus Cooper, "and I hope we shall be better acquainted, sir," said Signor Billsmethi. "And I'm sure I hope we shall too, sir," responded Augustus Cooper. Just then the door opened, and in came a young lady, with her hair curled in a crop all over her head, and her shoes tied in sandals all over her ankles. "Don't run away, my dear," said Signor Belsmethy, for the young lady didn't know Mr. Cooper was there when she ran in, and was going to run out again in her modesty, all in confusion like. "Don't run away, my dear," said Signor Belsmethy. "This is Mr. Cooper. Mr. Cooper of Fetter Lane. Mr. Cooper, my daughter, sir. Miss Belsmethy, sir, who I hope will have the pleasure of dancing many a quadrille, minuet, gavotte, country dance, fandango, double hornpipe, and jingo with you, sir. She dances them all, sir, and so shall you, sir, before you're a quarter older, sir." And Signor Belsmethy slapped Mr. Augustus Cooper on the back, as if he had known him a dozen years. So friendly. And Mr. Cooper bowed to the young lady, and the young lady curtsied to him, and Signor Belsmethy said they were as handsome a pair as ever he'd wished to see. Upon which the young lady exclaimed, "Lor, Pa!" and blushed as red as Mr. Cooper himself. You might have thought they were both standing under a red lamp at a chemist's shop. And before Mr. Cooper went away, it was settled that he should join the family circle that very night, taking them just as they were, no ceremony nor nonsense of that kind, and learn his position in order that he might lose no time and be able to come out at the forthcoming ball. Well, Mr. Augustus Cooper went away to one of the cheap shoemakers' shops in Holborn, where gentlemen's dress pumps are 7 and 6pence, and men's strong walking just nothing at all, and bought a pair of the regular 7 and 6penny, long-quartered town maids, in which he astonished himself quite as much as his mother, and sallied forth to Signor Belsmethy's. There were 4 other private pupils in the parlor, 2 ladies and 2 gentlemen. Such nice people. Not a bit of pride about them. One of the ladies in particular, who was in training for a Columbine, was remarkably affable, and she and Miss Belsmethy took such an interest in Mr. Augustus Cooper, and joked and smiled, and looked so bewitching, that he got quite at home, and learnt his steps in no time. After the practising was over, Signor Belsmethy and Miss Belsmethy and Master Belsmethy and a young lady and the 2 ladies and the 2 gentlemen danced a quadrille, none of your slipping and sliding about, but regular warm work, flying into corners and diving among chairs and shooting out at the door. Something like dancing. Signor Belsmethy, in particular, notwithstanding his having a little fiddle to play all the time, was out on the landing every figure, and Master Belsmethy, when everybody else was breathless, danced a hornpipe with a cane in his hand and a cheese plate on his head, to the unqualified admiration of the whole company. Then Signor Belsmethy insisted, as they were so happy, that they should all stay to supper, and proposed sending Master Belsmethy for the beer and spirits, whereupon the 2 gentlemen swore strike and woga if they'd stand that, and they were just going to quarrel who should pay for it, when Mr. Augustus Cooper said he would, if they'd have the kindness to allow him. And they had the kindness to allow him. And Master Belsmethy brought the beer in a can, and the rum in a quart pot. They had a regular night of it, and Miss Belsmethy squeezed Mr. Augustus Cooper's hand under the table, and Mr. Augustus Cooper returned the squeeze, and returned home too, at something to 6 o'clock in the morning, when he was put to bed by main force by the apprentice, after repeatedly expressing an uncontrollable desire to pitch his reverend parent out of the 2nd-floor window, and to throttle the apprentice with his own neck-handkerchief. Weeks had worn on, and the 7 and 6penny town maids had nearly worn out, when the night arrived for the grand dress ball, at which the whole of the 75 pupils were to meet together for the first time that season, and to take out some portion of their respective 4 and 6pences in lamp oil and fiddlers. Mr. Augustus Cooper had ordered a new coat for the occasion, a 2-pound tenner from Turnstile. It was his first appearance in public, and, after a grand Sicilian shawl dance by 14 young ladies in character, he was to open the quadrille department with Miss Belsmethy herself, with whom he had become quite intimate since his first introduction. It was a night. Everything was admirably arranged. The sandwich boy took the hats and bonnets at the street door. There was a turn-up bedstead in the back parlor, on which Miss Belsmethy made tea and coffee for such of the gentlemen as chose to pay for it, and such of the ladies as the gentlemen treated. Red port wine negus and lemonade were handed round at 18pence a head, and in pursuance of a previous engagement with the public house at the corner of the street, an extra pot-boy was laid on for the occasion. In short, nothing could exceed the arrangements except the company. Such ladies! Such pink silk stockings! Such artificial flowers! Such a number of cabs! No sooner had one cab set down a couple of ladies than another cab drove up and set down another couple of ladies, and they all knew, not only one another, but the majority of the gentlemen into the bargain, which made it all as pleasant and lively as could be. Senor Belsmethy, in black tights, with a large blue bow in his buttonhole, introduced the ladies to such of the gentlemen as were strangers, and the ladies talked away, and laughed they did. It was delightful to see them. As to the shawl dance, it was the most exciting thing that ever was beheld. There was such whisking and rustling and fanning and getting ladies into a tangle with artificial flowers, and then disentangling them again. And as to Mr. Augustus Cooper's share in the quadrille, he got through it admirably. He was missing from his partner now and then, certainly, and discovered on such occasions to be either dancing with laudable perseverance in another set, or sliding about in perspective without any definite object. But, generally speaking, they managed to shove him through the figure until he turned up in the right place. Be this as it may, when he had finished, a great many ladies and gentlemen came up and complimented him very much, and said they had never seen a beginner do anything like it before. And Mr. Augustus Cooper was perfectly satisfied with himself, and everybody else into the bargain, and stood considerable quantities of spirits and water, negus and compounds, for the use and behoof of 2 or 3 dozen very particular friends, selected from the select circle of 75 pupils. Now, whether it was the strength of the compounds, or the beauty of the ladies, or what not, it did so happen that Mr. Augustus Cooper encouraged, rather than repelled, the very flattering attentions of a young lady in brown gauze over white calico, who had appeared particularly struck with him from the first. And when the encouragements had been prolonged for some time, Miss Belsmethy betrayed her spite and jealousy thereat by calling the young lady in brown gauze a creature, which induced the young lady in brown gauze to retort, in certain sentences containing a taunt founded on the payment of 4 and 6 a quarter, which reference Mr. Augustus Cooper, being then and there in a state of considerable bewilderment, expressed his entire concurrence in. Miss Belsmethy, thus renounced, forthwith began screaming in the loudest key of her voice, at the rate of 14 screams a minute, and being unsuccessful, in an onslaught on the eyes and face, first of the lady in gauze, and then of Mr. Augustus Cooper, called distractedly on the other 73 pupils to furnish her with oxalic acid for her own private drinking, and, the call not being honored, made another rush at Mr. Cooper, and then had her stay-lace cut, and was carried off to bed. Mr. Augustus Cooper, not being remarkable for quickness of apprehension, was at a loss to understand what all this meant, until Senor Belsmethy explained it in a most satisfactory manner, by stating to the pupils that Mr. Augustus Cooper had made and confirmed diverse promises of marriage to his daughter on diverse occasions, and had now basely deserted her, on which the indignation of the pupils became universal, and as several chivalrous gentlemen inquired rather pressingly of Mr. Augustus Cooper whether he required anything for his own use, or, in other words, whether he wanted anything for himself, he deemed it prudent to make a precipitate retreat. And the upshot of the matter was that a lawyer's letter came next day, and an action was commenced next week, and that Mr. Augustus Cooper, after walking twice to the Serpentine for the purpose of drowning himself, and coming twice back without doing it, made a confidant of his mother, who compromised the matter with £20 from the till, which made £20 4 and 6 paid to Senor Belsmethy, exclusive of treats and pumps. And Mr. Augustus Cooper went back and lived with his mother, and there he lives to this day. And as he has lost his ambition for society, and never goes into the world, he will never see this account of himself, and will never be any the wiser. Chapter 10. Shabby-Genteel People. There are certain descriptions of people who, oddly enough, appear to appertain exclusively to the metropolis. You meet them every day in the streets of London, but no one ever encounters them elsewhere. They seem indigenous to the soil, and to belong as exclusively to London as its own smoke, or the dingy bricks and mortar. We could illustrate the remark by a variety of examples, but in our present sketch we will only advert to one class as a specimen, that class which is so aptly and expressively designated as shabby-genteel. Now, shabby people, God knows, may be found anywhere, and genteel people are not articles of greater scarcity out of London than in it. But this compound of the two, this shabby gentility, is as purely local as the statue at Charing Cross or the pump at Aldgate. It is worthy of remark, too, that only men are shabby genteel. A woman is always either dirty and slovenly in the extreme, or neat and respectable, however poverty-stricken in appearance. A very poor man, who has seen better days, as the phrase goes, is a strange compound of dirty slovenliness and wretched attempts at faded smartness. We will endeavor to explain our conception of the term, which forms the title of this paper. If you meet a man lounging up Drury Lane or leaning with his back against a post in Longacre, with his hands in the pockets of a pair of drab trousers plentifully besprinkled with grease spots, the trousers made very full over the boots, and ornamented with 2 cords down the outside of each leg, wearing also what has been a brown coat with bright buttons, and a hat very much pinched up at the side, cocked over his right eye, don't pity him. He is not shabby genteel. The harmonic meetings at some fourth-rate public house, or the purlieus of a private theatre, are his chosen haunts. He entertains a rooted antipathy to any kind of work, and is on familiar terms with several pantomime men at the large houses. But if you see hurrying along the by-street, keeping as close as he can to the area railings, a man of about 40 or 50, clad in an old rusty suit of threadbare black cloth, which shines with constant wear as if it had been beeswaxed, the trousers tightly strapped down, partly for the look of the thing, and partly to keep his old shoes from slipping off at his heels. If you observe, too, that his yellowish-white neckerchief is carefully pinned up to conceal the tattered garment underneath, and that his hands are encased in the remains of an old pair of beaver gloves, you may set him down as a shabby, genteel man. A glance at that depressed face and timorous air of conscious poverty will make your heart ache, always supposing that you are neither a philosopher nor a political economist. We were once haunted by a shabby genteel man. He was bodily present to our senses all day, and he was in our mind's eye all night. The man of whom Sir Walter Scott speaks in his Demonology did not suffer half the persecution from his imaginary gentleman usher in black velvet that we sustained from our friend in quondam black cloth. He first attracted our notice by sitting opposite to us in the reading room at the British Museum, and what made the man more remarkable was that he always had before him a couple of shabby genteel books, 2 old dog's-eared folios in mouldy, worm-eaten covers, which had once been smart. He was in his chair every morning, just as the clock struck 10. He was always the last to leave the room in the afternoon, and when he did, he quitted it with the air of a man who knew not where else to go, for warmth and quiet. There he used to sit all day, as close to the table as possible, in order to conceal the lack of buttons on his coat, with his old hat carefully deposited at his feet, where he evidently flattered himself it escaped observation. About 2 o'clock, you would see him munching a French roll or a penny loaf, not taking it boldly out of his pocket at once, like a man who knew he was only making a lunch, but breaking off little bits in his pocket and eating them by stealth. He knew too well it was his dinner. When we first saw this poor object, we thought it quite impossible that his attire could ever become worse. We even went so far as to speculate on the possibility of his shortly appearing in a decent second-hand suit. We knew nothing about the matter. He grew more and more shabby genteel every day. The buttons dropped off his waistcoat, one by one. Then he buttoned his coat, and when one side of the coat was reduced to the same condition as the waistcoat, he buttoned it over on the other side. He looked somewhat better at the beginning of the week than at the conclusion, because the neckerchief, though yellow, was not quite so dingy, and in the midst of all this wretchedness, he never appeared without gloves and straps. He remained in this state for a week or 2. At length, one of the buttons on the back of the coat fell off, and then the man himself disappeared, and we thought he was dead. We were sitting at the same table about a week after his disappearance, and as our eyes rested on his vacant chair, we insensibly fell into a train of meditation on the subject of his retirement from public life. We were wondering whether he had hung himself, or thrown himself off a bridge, whether he really was dead or had only been arrested, when our conjectures were suddenly set at rest by the entry of the man himself. He had undergone some strange metamorphosis, and walked up the center of the room with an air which showed he was fully conscious of the improvement of his appearance. It was very odd. His clothes were a fine, deep, glossy black, and yet they looked like the same suit. Nay, they were the very darns with which old acquaintance had made us familiar. The hat, too. Nobody could mistake the shape of that hat, with its high crown gradually increasing in circumference towards the top. Long service had imparted to it a reddish-brown tint, but now it was as black as the coat. The truth flashed suddenly upon us. They had been revived. It is a deceitful liquid, that black and blue reviver. We have watched its effect on many a shabby-genteel man. It betrays its victims into a temporary assumption of importance, possibly into the purchase of a new pair of gloves, or a cheap stock, or some other trifling article of dress. It elevates their spirits for a week, only to depress them, if possible, below their original level. It was so in this case. The transient dignity of the unhappy man decreased in exact proportion as the reviver wore off. The knees of the unmentionables, and the elbows of the coat, and the seams generally, soon began to get alarmingly white. The hat was once more deposited under the table, and its owner crept into his seat as quietly as ever. There was a week of incessant small rain and mist. At its expiration, the reviver had entirely vanished, and the shabby-genteel man never afterwards attempted to effect any improvement in his outward appearance. It would be difficult to name any particular part of town as the principal resort of shabby-genteel men. We have met a great many persons of this description in the neighborhood of the Inns of Court. They may be met with in Holborn between 8 and 10 any morning, and whoever has the curiosity to enter the insolvent debtor's court will observe, both among spectators and practitioners, a great variety of them. We never went on 'Change by any chance without seeing some shabby-genteel men, and we have often wondered what earthly business they can have there. They will sit there for hours, leaning on great, dropsical, mildewed umbrellas, or eating Abernethy biscuits. Nobody speaks to them, nor they to anyone. On consideration, we remember to have occasionally seen 2 shabby-genteel men conversing together on 'Change, but our experience assures us that this is an uncommon circumstance, occasioned by the offer of a pinch of snuff, or some such civility. It would be a task of equal difficulty either to assign any particular spot for the residence of these beings, or to endeavor to enumerate their general occupations. We were never engaged in business with more than one shabby-genteel man, and he was a drunken engraver, and lived in a damp back parlor in a new row of houses at Camden Town, Half Street, Half Brick Field, somewhere near the canal. A shabby-genteel man may have no occupation, or he may be a corn agent, or a coal agent, or a wine merchant, or a collector of debts, or a broker's assistant, or a broken-down attorney. He may be a clerk of the lowest description, or a contributor to the press of the same grade. Whether our readers have noticed these men in their walks as often as we have, we know not. This we know, that the miserably poor man, no matter whether he owes his distresses to his own conduct or that of others, who feels his poverty and vainly strives to conceal it, is one of the most pitiable objects in human nature. Such objects, with few exceptions, are shabby-genteel people.